Hello and welcome to NAHRO's ReOpen, a forum for and with executive leaders in the housing industry. I want to welcome everyone to today's session. We have a great session today on eviction prevention that will have a number of speakers, housing authority speakers, to share their experience on eviction prevention. I am Georgie Banna. I'm NAHRO's Director of Policy and Program Development. I'll be your moderator for today's session. And before we get too far into it, I do want to touch on a couple of technical pieces just to make sure we're on the same page. And if there are any issues, that we get those issues resolved for you. If you are having any technical difficulties, please feel free to email us at professionaldevelopment@nahro.org. Again, professionaldevelopment@nahro.org. Or you can give us a call at 202-289-3500. Again, 202-289-3500. As a tip though, if you're having any audio issues or even visual issues with seeing the slides, what will fix most of those issues, about 90% of them, is just to log out of the webinar and then to log back in. That will resolve about 90% of the concerns, and you'll be back up and running very quickly. So with that, I do want to turn things now over to our NAHRO president, Sunny Shaw.
Wonderful. Thank you, Georgie. Welcome, NAHRO family, to this sixth session of our executive director, deputy director conversations about reopening. We have been selecting topics based on feedback that we've gotten from each of you, as well as some folks who have been sending me emails and giving us ideas of things that you want to hear that will help you as you determine how the issues you need to address as you're moving into the reopen process. Recognizing that across the country, everyone is in different stages of that process, but hopefully this is information that has been on your mind as you're thinking it through, and we're able to share some ideas as we move forward. I want to let you know that our dynamic CEO, Ms. Adrienne Todman, is on the line with us today. She's looking forward to the things that we'll be hearing as well. I want to thank her and the NAHRO team for working so diligently to put these sessions together once the idea for the session has been presented to them. So thank you, NAHRO, for working to put these together for us. Today's topic is eviction prevention, and we are thrilled to bring to you three folks from across the country who have been doing work in their communities to make sure that as the eviction moratorium is lifted, that we are not sending a lot of folks to court for evictions, both our residents and those who are out there in the voucher program, that we're working to make sure that their homes are stabilized, that they're secure in their housing, and that we aren't disrupting lives because of the moratorium and the things that have happened during COVID-19. Today, we have speakers that are April Thompson. She's the executive director from Rock Springs Housing Authority in Wyoming. Then we'll hear from Frank Gazio. He's the executive director at Allegheny Housing Authority in Pittsburgh. And then we have Zack Guerin with us. He's the Chief Operations Officer for Foothills Regional Housing Authority. These are individuals that we've identified that have been doing some pretty cool things in their communities. So we've invited them to share, and we hope that you will learn a lot from them. With that, April, I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for taking part out of your time out of your busy day to take part in this eviction prevention webinar. Evictions can be costly to an agency and difficult. My staff and myself make every effort to help our residents and voucher program participants avoid eviction from their homes and continue to maintain stable housing. Unfortunately, evictions have occurred at my agency for lease violations such as harassment, criminal activity, and fraud. However, by working with the residents when they are facing a financial crisis and being proactive when dealing with delinquent accounts, our agency has had no evictions for non-payment in over 7 years. While I don't have all the answers on how to prevent evictions, I can tell you what works for my agency. We here at the Rock Springs Housing Authority take a proactive approach with rent collection and have found that communication with residents before they become delinquent has decreased the number of delinquencies for our organization. Newsletters are distributed with information on budgeting, ways to conserve energy to reduce utility costs, and other programs that are available to help our residents. Reminders to report any changes in income, either increases or decreases, are posted in our office and are included with most communications with our residents. We generate delinquency reports from our software on a weekly basis. This enables us to keep in contact with those accounts and to monitor balances. As the accounts are monitored, we can then start communication with residents that have a balance due. Reminder letters with the amounts owed are generated and mailed to each resident. And these letters are a reminder that they have not paid on their account yet this month. They contain language concerning late fees that are accruing, a reminder to contact the office if they're unable to pay on their account, and then that an eviction may be issued if an account is not paid. If we still have not received payment on an account by the 15th of the month, then staff will contact the resident by phone. Questions are asked of the resident and include if they've had a change in their circumstances or have recently had a reduction in income. If an interim is needed, then the paperwork needed to complete this is given to prevent the resident from incurring more charges on their account. We also provide the resident with local resources depending on their circumstances and set a date that partial payments will be due. Resources that are provided include the food bank, utility payment help, mental health and medical providers that work on a sliding fee, day care programs that are income-based, and financial classes. For our senior and disabled residents, we also point them in the direction of meal delivery services and home health resources. If the resident is still unable to pay, then we will offer a repayment agreement and start the process. Depending on how much is owed and the resident's current circumstances, determines how long they will be given to repay the past due amount. When it became clear that many in our community were being laid off or terminated from the workplace due to the COVID-19 pandemic, letters were sent to all participants, letting them know that our staff was still working and to contact us if they had a change in income or needed resources. This letter included many of the resources that the resident may be in need of, including contact information for the unemployment office. We then forwarded the HUD flyer addressing tenant concerns regarding rent and temporary suspension of evictions for non-payment of rent to all residents, voucher holders, and property owners that participate in our voucher program. This flyer reminded the participant that rent was still due, even though there was a moratorium on evictions. By being proactive and keeping the lines of communication open with our residents, my agency has been able to help them continue to stay in their homes, work towards financial stability, and allow our agency to not have a large receivable balance at the end of each month. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm going to give the floor back to Georgie now.
Excellent. Thank you, April. Lots of great information. Appreciate you sharing your experiences. Please stick around. I'll have some questions at the end of today's session. And just a reminder for everyone, you can ask questions through the chat feature, the question feature. You can type those in, and you'll be able to raise your hand later in the session, and I can unmute your lines, and then you can ask your question as well. And I'll talk more about that when we get closer to the question and answer time. Next, let's turn things over to Frank Agazio, the Executive Director from the Allegheny County Housing Authority. Frank, welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I hope everyone's doing well. I think we have a potential crisis on the horizon. And a couple weeks ago, I'll start with this story. A couple weeks ago, I got a call from a local television reporter, and he sent me an article from the New York Times entitled "An Avalanche of Evictions Could Be Bearing Down on America's Renters." And of course, he wanted to do an interview and wanted to know how many people we'd have up for eviction. And needless to say, I wasn't comfortable doing the interview. So I sent him a statement. And the statement, basically, I'll take you to the last line of my statement. It's the next slide. But I say on the last line that we hope to limit the number of evictions for rent to the best of our ability. And that's what we're trying to do, and that's what I'll be talking about. He also sent me another article, if anybody wanted to look at it, in the Politico. It was published on June 12th. And also brings to light the possibility of, unfortunately, of mass evictions throughout the country. What we found is that amongst our residents, especially in our family developments, there's a misunderstanding what moratorium is. And some of our residents think that the moratorium means they don't have to pay rent. And what we're doing at what we've experienced and what is a downturn in our rent collection at the family developments. The Housing Authority has reached out to educate residents in a variety of ways. We've sent many mass emails out to every resident who has a valid email. We also have prominently put on our website a link for an interim recertification form. We explained our policy and encouraged folks that have lost hours due to being laid off or have been let go in their job that they could click on the form on our website of the interim recertification form, and we would adjust their rent accordingly. We're attempting to, of course, change the misconception about the rent being included in the moratorium. This is being done through a number of platforms. We recently contracted with a vendor to do robocalls and texting and email residents, reminding them of their obligation to pay rent. This is being done in good taste. It's not offensive. It's very friendly. Managers are personally calling residents with balances greater than $100. We're also wording added to our monthly billing statements, reminding residents of the rent obligation. And on the application, and this has worked in the past, there's an emergency contact. Usually it's the closest relative, and that has worked in the past, and it's starting to work again. A lot of times, if it's a young family, their closest relative would be their parents. Well, at times we call the parents, and of course they don't want Johnny or Sally coming back home, and they end up paying the balance for them. So that's there too to prevent an eviction. We also have multiple options or tools available for residents to stave off eviction. We are encouraging repayment agreements. The resident can pay current rent plus an additional amount. We're being very flexible on any kind of a down payment there. We have what's called the direct debit program, and we encourage this, that the rent can be automatically withdrawn from a resident's bank account on the 5th of every month. This is very popular among seniors, and we've been not as lucky on our family developments, but this has worked. Statements are sent to residents, and that the rent is sent directly to the bank. The bank has a lockbox, and that hits our accounts that day. We also have given the residents the option for online payments. They could pay over online or over the phone. They could of course, they could use their checking or savings account information to do this. And we also take credit card payments. This has been very beneficial, especially in cases where there's been damage or maintenance charges, or the resident can use a credit card to pay off their balance. This has worked, and it's been a significant benefit and staved off eviction. We at the Housing Authority realize that this doesn't present a good look for us or for the industry if there'd be a lot of evictions once the moratorium has been lifted. We've had some internal discussions amongst our executive staff. In the event a large number of families would face evictions when the moratorium is lifted. We even talked about starting, if we had to do any evictions, start with with those that owe the largest balance, and maybe at one time cap evictions to single digits. We feel it would not be a good look to file on July 27th, the first day that the moratorium is lifted. So we plan to take, at the Allegheny County Housing Authority, we plan to take a cautious approach and maybe just wait a little bit, and because this is a very sensitive national issue, and do everything we can to have folks not be in a position to be evicted. Thank you.
Excellent. No, thank you, Frank. That's a lot of great information. Thanks for showing providing the examples and the importance too of the media connections. I think it's in responding to and making sure you are that voice in that community as well and sharing what's actually happening on the ground. Thank you for that information. And again, we'll have some questions at the end, towards the end of today's session. Before we move on to Zach, I do want to mention we also have a couple handouts for today's session as well. You can go to the handout section of the GoToWebinar toolbar, go down, click on the arrow, it will open up. There's two handouts. You have to click on each of those, but they'll download directly to your device. The first one is actually the HUD COVID-19 frequently asked questions that was released on May 29th, the most recent FAQs. There is a section on the eviction moratorium in those FAQs that provide the HUD guidance, additional HUD guidance on the eviction moratorium. There's also, though, a flyer that NAHRO has partnered with the National Housing Law Project out of San Francisco to put together for tenants on the eviction moratorium, saying what, so providing, the HUD has also provided information that April mentioned. This is a little bit clearer, a little simpler language, making sure the information is there and available to the residents. It also shows the more important part as well, reaching out to the housing authority and making sure the housing authority, the resident provides you information to recertify if there is a loss of income or a loss of a job, that you can make those adjustments. So hopefully the eviction moratorium won't have as big an impact on the housing authorities. But both those handouts are there. They're both available for immediate download right there. But with that, let's go ahead and turn over to Zack Guerin, the Chief Operations Officer from the Foothills Regional Housing Authority. Zack, welcome.
Thanks, Georgie. Thanks everyone for joining today. We can actually go to the next slide. So at Foothills Regional Housing, I think our big thing was, how do we communicate to our residents during the COVID-19 crisis that we aren't closing down our operations, but we were staying open but at a distance. And we can go to the next slide again, Georgie. So first and foremost, again, we made sure the FRH office is never really closed. We thought it was important to stay very involved on the site level and with our HCB participants. We found unique ways to stay in touch with them while embracing social distancing procedures. One unique way of staying in touch with people to just discuss, questions on rent or renewals or anything that came up was we hosted virtual town halls at all of our properties. Some properties we did them on a weekly basis, some were on bi-weekly basis. Sometimes we just did it on a monthly basis, just kind of depending on the popularity of the town halls. And it was a great time for residents to call in and ask questions. It was a way for us to also communicate to them, that we are waiving late fees, that we are, very flexible with rent payment dates. And if somebody does have a problem meeting their rent obligations, to reach out to one of our staff members so that we can assist them in either finding assistance or providing assistance from a fund that we had set up internally. It was extremely important to build a foundation of trust. And so what we did is, right when everything kind of started closing down, is we sent a notification out to all of our residents that, while our offices are closing down, we'll still be available via email or by phone. And we also installed like intercom systems at all of our properties and our home office, so that if somebody did come, that they would still have a live person to talk to, and if we were able to assist them in any way, we would. But again, building that foundation of trust, I think, was extremely important, because it made residents realize that they weren't in this by themselves, and that if there was a problem that came up, that they could come and talk to somebody or give us a call, and we would help them find assistance, instead of hiding, and not calling us and ignoring any type of notices that they were getting, and just not paying rent at all. I think the big thing for us was we didn't want any household to really become rent burdened at any point. So we even avoided payment plans, again, by setting up our own internal funds and finding external rent sources in the event somebody wasn't able to pay their rent. We also put renewals on hold for a time. Renewals are remaining on hold right now, currently until September for us. It may be extended further. That's just going to be based off of review with our executive team. But we didn't think that it was a good idea to be increasing people's rents during the COVID-19 crisis either. Again, people are already losing their jobs. Fortunately, I would say probably for most housing authorities, a lot of our residents are frontline workers. And so a good majority of our residents are the folks that work at grocery stores, or they were CNAs at senior homes. Some of them were nurses. And so we also thought it was a nice gesture to all of them to let them know that we appreciate their hard work during this time. And so we put all of our renewals on hold, but we continue to do recertifications at our tax credit properties or our 5.9 properties, but we did do them virtually. And by doing that with a online, lease signing and filling out forms online, which we worked with our local state agency on getting approval on. We can go to the next slide again. So again, we focused on helping families find resources for rental assistance. We partnered with local nonprofits, and we also hired housing navigators during this time to just help residents navigate this entire system right now. Applying for unemployment is a very difficult thing. On top of that, I think a lot of people are afraid of a lot of the verbiage that is in there. We have a lot of employees that were laid off just for, they had just had a reduction of hours. And a lot of the feedback we got from them is when they were, applying for unemployment, they were like, this sounds really scary because I don't know how to really balance my hours out. And so we had staff that were able to kind of help them walk them through that process and discuss all of those procedures with them, which I think was extremely important. And it helped them be able to, apply for whatever was necessary for them to get from the state so that they could still have an income coming in instead of just being afraid of applying for something and then not having any income at all for the couple of months that there was a reduction in their hours. You can go to the next slide now. So our normal eviction practices here are actually pretty special. So we try not to evict any of our residents. We actually have a very, very, very low eviction rate at Foothills Regional Housing. Last year, I think that our numbers were about 4 to 7%, and those were primarily due to major lease violations. And we're talking like, there was criminal activity or something involved. When it comes to rent, we always try to find resources for residents. Even if it is a lease violation, we work with the residents in identifying what the root cause is of the problem and how to help them fix it so that we can help them create a successful residency at our properties. The whole point of an eviction really, I think at the end of the day, is to get the bad apples out that could really infect the entire property. And not every lease violation or not everybody that forgets to pay their rent sometimes, that's not a bad apple to us. And so we really try to work with all of them, especially the folks that aren't able to pay their rent, because in a lot of their situations, again, they've lost their jobs and they're afraid to go communicate that to the office. We try to take the fear out of going to the office. I believe a lot of residents, and I mean, I can say this from being a renter, in a lot of scenarios, when I was a renter, I was always afraid to go to the office because, it was one of those things that you're like, oh gosh, it's like going to the principal. We try to take that fear aspect out of it and really make sure that our managers are very personable with all the residents so that if there is a change in their income or information that they can come and talk to us about it openly and not have any type of fear of any retaliation or fear of us being like, well, you need to figure that out. Instead, our managers are like, oh my gosh, let me help you find some resources. Let me help get you back on your feet again. And I think that's been extremely successful for us here. And then at the end of the day, we took the eviction power away from our property managers. So if a property does get to the point where they're like, I really can't work with this resident anymore, they will actually submit basically a small essay to myself and our director of property management explaining the scenario and situation. And then at that point, myself or the director of property management get involved with that resident, and we try to help them work through the problems next. And if we aren't successful in doing that, we are the ones that actually make the final call on any type of evictions. And again, that's really limited evictions. And it's also helped take any type of bias out of a manager's feelings towards a resident in the event there is any type of bad blood. And if there is bad blood, we really try to solve it by working with the resident and the manager at that point so that they can, again, have a successful residency and so that our employees also feel empowered to be able to work with the residents and enforce the lease. We can go to the next slide again. Another really huge thing that we did is we are very involved in Colorado NAHRO, and so I'm actually the president of Colorado NAHRO. And right when this all happened, we put together a small working group that worked with our Division of Housing here, and we were working at trying to identify funding sources for families. You know, granted, we went through our flawed structures, but we finally came out to an end product that is really great. It's been extremely successful so far. And we were able to initially obtain $900,000 to support families who were at an area median income of 50% or below. You know, again, there was some restrictions on it, like anyone that was on a voucher wasn't able to receive funding, or if there was any other types of subsidy or government money that was given to them, they weren't able to receive funding. And after a lot of work together, we were able to actually up the AMI to 80%. We were able to remove other restrictions, make the application process more simple, and we also were able to get an additional $2 million that is specific to housing authorities in Colorado. Something that is kind of puts, I think, a lot of landlords at a disadvantage in Colorado, and I'm sure in other states, is there's so many apartment communities. And again, a lot of people were affected by this COVID outbreak. And so we were trying to make sure that housing authorities weren't having to fight against private landlords or anyone else, and really kind of create a specific pot of money that was, again, specifically for a housing authority. So any units that are owned and managed by housing authorities were able to apply for rental assistance through Colorado NAHRO, who was able to grant them that difference in rent or pay the full amount that was due. And we went all the way back through March and are continuing that fund through later this year. I believe right now, I think our funding is going up until September, and there's a good chance that that could continue to get renewed. So those were really some of the big things that we did on our end at Foothills Regional Housing and for Colorado NAHRO. But I think that we always like to act like there's a moratorium on evictions, because again, we really wanted to focus on working with residents, and that's something that I think that we were able to accomplish at our agency, and I think that's something that Colorado NAHRO was also able to help accomplish with other housing authorities in the state as well. Other than that, you know, we worked on communication with our residents, again, finding creative ways like our intercom systems, making sure that our website had a specified page for COVID-19 resources. I really love everything that we did when it evolved around this COVID-19 outbreak, because we totally changed our website format so that, you know, initially, right when somebody logs in, they can see the communications about what's happening at our office, what our hours are, how we're responding to work orders, how we're responding to inspections. From an inspection standpoint, you know, move-ins have to still happen, even during a crisis. And so our inspectors, for the folks that are on the voucher program, are starting to do virtual inspections for anyone that is recertifying. And then for brand new move-ins, that is the only thing that our inspector is actually going to right now physically, to make sure that we're keeping our staff safe. But then as far as the certifications go, keeping the residents that are in place very safe. And it's been working really well. And so I think that if people just kind of look at this as an opportunity, and not as like, oh my gosh, we have to reopen in a totally different world. It's an opportunity to really kind of form our business to making sure that we're meeting the needs of our residents always, regardless of what comes at us. And that's kind of it. So thanks for having me today, Georgie.
No, that's excellent. No, thank you, Zach. You know, using eviction prevention really as you know, for all housing authorities, I think a core value, but maybe a little bit underlying. You bring it right to the surface, and having the whole agency kind of work around that as well, I think is a great example. And that partnership between the state of Colorado and Colorado NAHRO to focus on housing authorities. We'll probably have some more questions on that in just a minute for you as well. But that's, you know, thank you for sharing that with us as well. So now it is just about time for our question and answer period. Questions for April, Frank, and Zach. Just as a reminder for the question portion, that we are able to take questions through the chat feature and the questions feature. You can type those in. You can also, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to lower everyone's hand in case anyone has their hand raised. You can now raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and then we'll come over and I'll unmute your line and ask you to speak your question. But with that, let me turn things over to Eric Oberdorfer, NAHRO's policy advisor. to get started on the question and answer period. Eric, it's all yours.
All right, great. Thank you, Georgie. And thank you to Zach, Frank, and April for joining us today and sharing what your agencies have been able to do as it relates to ensuring that we really see a minimum amount of evictions once we hit this end of the eviction moratorium. The first question that we had popped up, and I think, Frank, I'll start with you on this because you had mentioned that you guys had moved to a place where you would allow residents to pay their rent using online payments. When you,
Correct. That's
when
correct.
you do that, are you charging any type of a convenience fee to the resident for that service, or are you eating the costs of what that is? Or are there additional costs that you have to pay for that kind of online feature?
There's a cost on if they're using a credit card, not on the online feature.
Okay, and if they do use a credit card, would that cost go to the resident or to the agency?
Right now we're splitting it, so I think it's $10 convenience fee, so it's $5 to them, and we're eating $5.
Okay, great. Another question too that just popped up, and I'll start with you, Zach, for this, especially as it relates to the eviction moratorium. Can you talk a little bit about how you've worked with your voucher landlords and making sure that they understand kind of what the eviction moratorium is and what the restrictions that they had in terms of working with their tenants and working with you guys throughout that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were really good at, again, trying to jump on this ahead of time. So initially we sent out messages to all of our landlords, letting them know that rent is going to get paid regardless. If that rent is being paid by us and not the the resident, if the resident had a loss in job and they weren't able to report it to us in time, that we would find a way to make sure that it was getting covered. So to not be worried about any of their finances, that was extremely important. But then as soon as the moratorium got put into place, we communicated by making sure that any of the checks that went out, whether they were done electronically or by paper, always had a message attached to them explaining, what the current regulations are, when the expiration of those regulations are, and again, the fact that if they feel like a resident isn't reporting their income appropriately or whatnot, to contact us so that we can work with the resident and send our housing navigators out so that we could, figure out if we needed to make an adjustment in what we were paying as far as our portion goes. And that's been extremely successful. And I think that we've only had a few landlords really call us with any type of concerns. Other than that, a lot of them have really just kind of been appreciative of the fact that we were including it, again, in electronic messages to them for those folks that were getting electronic payments, and then the written statements as well.
Great, thanks. April and Frank, do you have anything to add to what your approach has been with working with your voucher landlords throughout this period?
This is April, and we were just very communicative with them. We let them know firsthand what was going on, a lot like Zachary did. We made sure that they were aware that our rent payments would continue to go to them and that we were working with tenants that had possibly lost their jobs. Communication seems to be best practice, especially in these times, and making sure that people know what their rights are and what's going on, and not panicking and encouraging the fear that's out there.
We have a significant amount of outreach that goes on. It's a large county. It's 759 square miles, and we actually have about 2,000 landlords. So our Housing Choice Voucher Program department does a good job doing outreach and reaching out to the individual owners, and haven't heard many stories of eviction or like that. I think we're doing well there. It's so far it's not a major problem.
Great, that's good to hear. Georgie, I'll ask, do we have any hands that have popped up that would like to ask any questions from the audience?
We do, Eric. Thank you. Faye, I have unmuted your line. Go ahead. Ask your question. Faye, do you have a question? Let me try one more. Teresa, I'm unmuting your line. Do you have a question? Teresa, are you there? Oh. All right, Eric, let me turn it back to you.
All right, great. We did have a question come in that asks, are any of you planning to encourage your residents to submit or request rent relief payments under the CARES Act rent relief? So I think what the question is trying to ask is, are you planning to, for those of your residents that may need rent relief or have struggled to keep up with their rent, are you planning on using any of the CARES Act funding toward helping them? And April, I'll start with you.
I'm really lucky in that I only have 2 residents that are behind on their rent right now. So for us, that's a no.
Frank, how about you?
Well, our Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency just came out with a program. It's about $3.5 million if you're behind in your rent, and we send notification to all our residents and our programs that this money is available to them if they should be owing rent to their either landlord or the housing authority. We also have a good relationship with the Urban League, which helps many of our residents when they're behind in the rent. The money that our state agency got is from the CARES Act. So just those are 2 sources that we plan on using. As of right now, we may not use the money we're getting for the CARES Act because we're doing so many other things. But we could develop something later at a later time.
Great. And Zack, how about at your agency? Are you guys looking to use any of your CARES Act funding for potential rent relief for residents?
I believe we're going to use it for resources, absolutely. Prior to doing any type of rent relief, we're going to be utilizing the funds that have been made available by either the county that we work in or those state funds. We actually we ignited our staff together basically and had them call anybody who was late on their rent or had any type of delinquency and let them know that they could help walk them through the application for any of those other sources. But I believe that we're going to try to use those sources up prior to going towards any of the CARE Act money.
Great, thanks. April, I know that in Rock Springs, you guys are a smaller public housing agency. How many units does your agency have? A question came in asking that.
We are small. I have 100 public housing units, and then I have 67 vouchers.
Great, and I know for some small agencies, capacity can sometimes be a concern on a good day. And with everything that's been going on for the last couple of months, there's obviously been an increase in responsibilities for staff, and every kind of operational standpoint we've had has shifted slightly. Has it been challenging for your agency as a small agency to kind of keep up normal operations, and then also ensure that your communication with your residents is really strong and that there was a good sense of what the eviction moratorium meant and kind of what their rights were under that eviction moratorium and what their kind of ways forward could be?
My staff is exhausted. We continued to stay open the entire time. We changed our front lobby to where we weren't in direct contact with those coming in seeking assistance. The number of applications that we gave out increased. The interims more than tripled than what we normally do in a month. and my staff is exhausted. So I've done things to try to encourage them to take more frequent breaks. We did a yoga day, took an hour and closed everything up, and staff did yoga to try to calm and center themselves, just a little team building type exercise. Maintenance has continued to do only emergency work orders, but we have been able to increase some of the, pardon?
April, I think you broke up a little bit there towards the end. Do you mind just kind of saying that the last part of what you said?
About maintenance?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, maintenance is still doing emergency work orders, but it has enabled us to do a bunch of major projects that we had put off that they now were able to do outside. So workload has increased, they're tired, they're grouchy, residents are grouchy, and we're a small community. So when I go to the grocery store, I see my residents and end up having to speak with them there and sometimes get them resources, even when I'm not at work. So blessing that I'm a small agency and a curse.
I wondered too, especially since for households that have lost income throughout this period, have any of you as agencies seen increases in the interim reexaminations that you've had? And if so, has there been any specific type of household that you've really seen that from? So if seniors households seem to be more stable, or are you seeing more families that might be kind of experiencing ups and downs with their incomes? Zach, I'll start with you. Have you kind of seen an increase in those interim reexaminations, and are there kind of any specific households that really kind of stand out in terms of that?
Yeah, so our seniors again have been very stable. The population that we saw really get hit the hardest was the folks that were working part-time. I think a lot of companies, when they were having to make cuts, they moved a lot of their full-time employees to part-time and then really kind of cut their part-time employees' hours down even more or laid them off temporarily. The folks that also worked in the hospitality industry or the restaurant industry were heavily impacted. So we saw a lot of their income dissipate. So that was really the major populations that we saw got hit. And they were all really great though on staying on top of it with their technicians and doing those interim certifications.
Great. How about in Allegheny County, Frank?
We had a significant number of interims. So much so that some of our managers had a backlog. So it involves people, workers at hospitals, hotels. I mean, laborers, and whatever was was cut at the beginning of the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, it's when we first experienced it. Then it was a drop off, but it was steady, and so it took a while for our managers to catch up. But we made it retroactive to when it was effective for the family.
Great. April, in Rock Springs, did you guys see an increase with your interim examinations as well?
Yeah, our interims tripled over our normal. So, and it was mainly in the service industry, the waitresses and hosts. We also saw a huge decrease in those that worked for our school district, that were either paraprofessionals or bus drivers, because they were laid off and let go until hopefully in the fall they'll start up again.
Great, thanks. Frank, I know you had mentioned in your presentation that there was a concern potentially that some of your residents might have a misconception about what the eviction moratorium was and kind of their responsibility to continue paying rent, even though that eviction moratorium was put in place. It seems like you guys did a lot of outreach. Did you find that was pretty effective, and that it worked to kind of remove that misconception from the majority of your residents, or are there still some residents that you have that kind of still push back and feel as though, you know, it is kind of up to them to decide whether or not they pay their rent?
What we found was those who had significant balances when they were contacted by the property manager thought that they didn't have to, the moratorium meant that they didn't have to pay rent. And that was across the whole county in various family developments. We didn't experience that issue in the senior developments, but so we changed our statement that sent to them, putting some words in there that rent is due, rent, and we some of the other outreach measures that we did have been effective, but we still have more than this time last year. But I think we'll gradually reduce. There'll be a reduction in the number of families that owe us rent after we put all these measures in effect for a while.
Great. And Zack, was this a concern with your agency as well, this misconception? And did you guys have to take steps to kind of reach out to residents to ensure that they really understood what the eviction moratorium meant for them?
Yes. So initially it was a concern for us, and we did have some residents that were struggling to understand the difference between, the fact that we can't evict you and the fact that you still need to pay your rent. And so again, we try not to do evictions ever, but we still called our residents and let them know, we understand that there's a crisis going on. We wanted to take an opportunity to educate you on what the CARES Act is, what is going on, and answer any questions that you may have. And again, those town halls that we had really cleared up a lot of the problems. But we also worked really closely with, again, the Division of Housing for Colorado on resident education material to keep our residents very well educated around, what the moratorium was, when it was wearing off, and what everything meant for them and the steps that they needed to take to make sure that they, again, continue to have a successful residency.
Excellent. And April, was this communication piece pretty critical for you guys as well over in Rock Springs?
It was, and we've gotten a lot of calls, not from our residents, but from residents of other agencies in the conventional housing program or private landlords. They're the ones that are calling and wanting information, and we're pointing them in the right direction.
Excellent. Zack, I know in your presentation you had mentioned that Colorado NAHRO was able to secure some money, a pretty significant amount of money, I should say, for a rental assistance fund. Do you mind walking through kind of where that funding is coming from and how you guys were able to secure that?
Absolutely. So I believe actually some of that money is coming from the CARES Act, and the Division of Housing is the one who's providing it to us. And so again, very early on, we created a working group of executive directors who had weekly phone calls with some of the leadership over at the Division of Housing, including their executive director, and really walked through, the potential burden that could be caused for housing authorities who wouldn't be getting the rent from their residents that they would normally be expecting, and the hardship that it could cause for us in the development world and in being able to continue to provide services for our families. So I feel like the Division of Housing really prioritized, making sure that we got specified funds for housing authorities. And so the executive order that our governor here was signing, was making money available to the Division of Housing specifically for landlords. And so they then divided that money up between, again, the private industry, regular landlords, and then PHAs. And so that's really it's just been a very successful partnership as far as securing that money. But I don't think we would have gotten it if we wouldn't have been able to, feel like we could just go and have an open door with the Division of Housing. Very fortunately for us, one of their deputy directors sits on our Colorado NAHRO board. So right away, she was just like, what can we do to help you guys out? That's right when we created that working group, and it's been a very successful partnership.
Great, excellent. Georgie, just real quick, I want to check to make sure see if there are any hands that have been raised in the audience.
Thank you, Eric. Let me try one more. Teresa, go ahead. Your microphone is unmuted. Your question, Teresa? Teresa? All righty. Eric, back to you.
Great. A question came in that I think is pretty interesting, and I think it's going to depend upon the makeup of your agency and what types of housing programs you work with. But there are clearly some differences with different kind of assisted housing programs in terms of whether or not an eviction moratorium was put in place, when it's ending, and so on. And so if for any of you that might have housing outside of the Section 8 and public housing world, do you think that there might be any kind of friction that might occur due to the fact that different programs might be treated differently, you know, with Section 8 and public housing having the eviction moratorium ended soon, whereas the FHA has extended their eviction moratorium slightly? Are there any concerns within your agency for that? Both as it relates to confusion from residents, but also just kind of that different approach that we're seeing through the different federal agencies. Frank, if you don't mind, I'll start with you on that one.
Well, I'd like it to be consistent, and I think we would support an extension. It's always good when some of the various programs are if it's multifamily or whatever, when it's consistent with our programs as well. So right now I don't recall what their extension was, but we would prefer that whatever has been extended to another program work for our programs as well.
Great. In April, has there been any confusion for any of your residents with kind of these different dates, or has that not really been an issue for you guys?
For our small agency, no, it hasn't been an issue. I could see maybe in other portions of the state it might be, but for us, no.
Okay, excellent. And Zach, how about for you guys?
No, it hasn't been an issue. We try to keep continuity between all of our programs, and so we really try to follow the same policies. We have several market rate communities, and we follow the same exact policies that we would follow for any of our tax credit or 5/9 properties when it comes to noticing people. I do have, concern obviously for people outside of housing authorities in our state with those dates that are being communicated, but we have a very active it's funny, actually, our eviction attorneys out here, Cheddar, Hamrick, and Sulzer, have been very good at educating landlords about saying, hey, this is the court system, this is how it's going. We would encourage you offering your residents a little bit more education, providing them 30-day notices instead of 10-day notices, and things like that. So I think that the education aspect is very important, but for our portfolio specifically, no, it's not a concern for us. And we did send out communication to our residents, letting them know that we are going to continue with our moratorium and for them to contact us if they have any issues with rent payments.
Great, thanks for that. I think we've got time for one last question. And I think what I would ask of the three of you, if there was one thing that you think PHA should do to make sure that they're really prepared and that they've prepared their residents for the end of the eviction moratorium that we're coming up to, what do you think that one most important thing is to ensure that the residents are prepared? April, I'll start with you.
Communication. Just communicating everything to them and them communicating with us to me is the key.
Great. Frank?
Well, I agree with April. Direct communication between the property manager and the resident.
Excellent. And Zach?
I'll have to echo their thoughts on that as well. I think it's extremely important that, we went through this time where I think residents became very comfortable with coming and talking to our office, and it not being an issue over compliance, but making sure that they understand that there's going to be a continued focus on resident relationships and resident education, and keeping those lines of communication open between the office staff and them, so that they don't have to fear about going in the office over any type of compliance issue.
Great. I think that's all excellent advice. And I think if I took one thing away from this conversation with the three of you today, it's that constant communication, early communication, consistent communication is really key with your residents to make sure that they understand what's going on and what's expected of them, and what's going to happen once we reach the end of the eviction moratorium that was put in place back in March. So I just want to say thank you to April, Frank, and Zach for joining me for this conversation. I think it was great, and I hope it was useful for everyone who's joined us today. And with that, I will pass it back to our president, Sunny Shaw. Sunny?
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for your work in moderating this conversation. You've done a great job for us. And to our panelists, April, Frank, and Zachary, thank you so very much for preparing to present to our group what you're doing in your communities to make sure that we are preventing evictions in the best manner possible. Thank you to the NAHRO team, Georgie and Adrian, for helping to make sure we're able to have this webinar series, and for all of you for taking the time out of your day to learn hopefully something that's going to be very useful to you back in your communities. And we'll chat again soon. Georgie, I turn it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sunny. We do appreciate you putting these sessions on and bringing all the executive directors and deputy directors together. I do want to just, as we exit today, a couple of resources from NAHRO. Again, the NAHRO website, lots of great information on there. Our advocacy pushes as well, nahro.org/advocacy. Send letters to your members of Congress, the House and Senate side, and even to the administration. The NAHRO blog is available for hot topics. When something comes out, it's always there first. I do want to remind everyone on this session as well, we do have the two handouts, the tenant flyer for the eviction moratorium and HUD's FAQs. And finally, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, I'm Georgie Bana, Director of Policy. Tess Embry is also available for as our Director of Congressional Relations. Our teams work very closely together to make sure that HUD and Congress have all the information they need to make the best policies and laws to make sure you have what you need. So please communicate with us. Let us know what you need. We'll take that information and make sure the people who make decisions get that information. With that, thank you, everyone. Have a great day. And remember, we will be taking next week off. Keep an eye out for additional ReOpen webinars in the future. We'll send out information when they become available, but there is no session next week. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.